The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the overgrown fields of the old Oakwood property as Linda Morris stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, her secondhand sedan parked behind her. At 34, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many late nights, balancing budgets, and worrying about the future, Linda still carried herself with quiet determination. The warm September breeze lifted strands of her chestnut hair as she gazed at the weathered two-story farmhouse that dominated the landscape. "Is this going to be our house, Mom?" Jake's voice broke the silence as he and his twin sister Lily scrambled from the car, their 8-year-old energy undiminished by the 2-hour drive from their cramped apartment in the city. Linda smiled, watching her children race toward the wraparound porch with its peeling white paint and sagging steps. Maybe, she called after them, "we're just looking today." But in her heart, Linda already knew. This forgotten piece of Virginia countryside, with its faded grandeur and whispered promise of a fresh start, spoke to something deep within her. A librarian's salary didn't stretch far in the city, especially for a single mother of twins. The old Oakwood farm, with its surprisingly low asking price at the upcoming sheriff's sale, represented more than just affordable housing. It represented possibility. As the children explored the perimeter of the house, Linda unfolded the property listing she'd printed from the county website. 40 acres of rolling land, a 19th century farmhouse with good bones, a detached barn, and various outbuildings, all for a starting bid of $145,000 due to years of unpaid taxes. The property had stood empty for nearly a decade since the last Oakwood had passed away without heirs. "You the one interested in the old place?" The voice weathered as the barn board startled Linda. She turned to find an elderly woman watching from the neighboring property, her gnarled hands resting on a wooden cane. "Yes, ma'am," Linda replied, crossing to the limestone fence that separated the properties. "I'm Linda Morris. I'm considering bidding at the sheriff's sale next week." The woman studied her with faded blue eyes that had witnessed decades of seasons pass over these hills. "Mabel Jackson," she offered finally. "Been living next door to the Oakwoods my whole life, 78 years. Linda extended her hand across the ancient fence, feeling the rough stone beneath her palm. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Jackson. Do you know much about the history of this place?" Something flickered across Mabel's face, hesitation perhaps, or caution. "History runs deep here," she said carefully. "The Oakwood family owned this land since before the war between the states. Hannah was the first strong-minded woman, unusual for her time. The family kept to themselves mostly." Before Linda could inquire further, Lily's excited shout echoed across the yard. "Mom, come look at the porch. There's an old swing." Mabel's expression softened at the sound of childish excitement. "Been a long time since children's voices carried across these fields," she murmured. "Too long, maybe." As Linda excused herself to join her children, the elderly woman called after her, "This land chooses its keepers, Miss Morris. Always has." The cryptic comment lingered in Linda's mind as she climbed the creaking porch steps. Jake and Lily had already claimed the ancient swing, its chains groaning in protest as they pushed back and forth. Linda took in the solid craftsmanship of the house despite its neglected state, the wide planks of the porch floor, the intricate woodwork around the door frames, the high ceilings visible through grimy windows. "Can we go inside?" Jake asked, his blue eyes so like his father's, wide with anticipation. Linda shook her head. "Not today. The county agent couldn't meet us until tomorrow." She ran her hand along the porch railing, feeling the stories embedded in the wood. "But we can explore the grounds a bit before heading back." As the twins raced down the steps, eager to investigate the mysterious property, Linda found herself drawn to the weathered limestone fence posts that marked the boundaries. Each stood about 4 feet tall, their surfaces etched by nearly 2 centuries of wind and rain. They formed a line that stretched toward a small orchard, barely visible through years of untamed growth. "Look what I found," Jake's voice cut through her contemplation. He stood near one of the fence posts, holding something that caught the fading sunlight. As Linda approached, she saw a tarnished pocket watch dangling from his small hand, its gold casing dulled by time. "Where did you find that?" she asked, carefully taking the antique timepiece. "It was just sitting on top of this rock," Jake pointed to the limestone post. "Like someone left it there." Linda examined the watch, noting its intricate engraving. When opened, it revealed a delicate clock face with Roman numerals, the hands frozen at 3:17. On the inside of the case, 2 letters were elegantly engraved, H.O. H.O. Linda murmured. Those could be the initials of an Oakwood. Can I keep it? Jake asked hopefully. Linda closed the watch gently. This might be important to someone, honey. We should ask around first. She slipped the timepiece into her pocket, feeling its weight physical and somehow more against her hip. As the sun began its final descent behind the distant Blue Ridge Mountains, Linda gathered the children for the drive back to their apartment. But as they pulled away, she found herself looking back at the silent house, its windows reflecting the golden light like knowing eyes. Something about this place called to her beyond the practical considerations of affordability and space. This land chooses its keepers, Mabel had said. Linda tightened her grip on the steering wheel, the antique watch a solid presence in her pocket, and made her decision. In 1 week, she would return for the sheriff's sale, bringing every cent of her savings and the small inheritance from her grandmother. She would make the Oakwood farm her home, their home, no matter what it took. The county courthouse buzzed with unusual activity for a Tuesday morning. Linda sat in the third row of the auction room, her palm damp with nervous anticipation. She had spent the previous week researching everything she could about the property, securing pre-approval for a modest mortgage, and preparing for this moment with methodical determination. The Oakwood farm would be the 5th property auctioned today. Linda watched as the first 4 sales proceeded, noting with some concern how quickly the bids escalated beyond the starting prices. When the auctioneer finally announced item 5, the Oakwood property, Linda straightened in her seat, her heart hammering against her ribs. 40 acres with structures, minimum bid $145,000 due to back taxes and liens, the auctioneer droned. Do I have $145 to start? Linda raised her hand, half expecting a flurry of competing bids, but the room remained silent, save for the gentle whirring of the ceiling fans overhead. She glanced around, confused by the lack of interest in what seemed to her a remarkable bargain. I have $145 from number 17, the auctioneer continued, looking for $150 anywhere. The silence stretched, taking on an almost palpable weight. Linda noticed several attendees exchanging glances, but no one raised a paddle. Going once at $145, Danny, the auctioneer called, his voice echoing in the quiet chamber. Going twice. In the breathless moment before the final call, Linda sensed movement at the back of the room. A tall man in an expensive suit had entered, his silver hair catching the light as he surveyed the proceedings with cool authority. Their eyes met briefly, his narrowed with calculation, hers wide with sudden apprehension, before the gavel fell with a decisive crack. Sold to bidder 17 for $145,000. The proceedings moved on to the next property, but Linda barely heard the auctioneer's continued patter. She had done it. The Oakwood farm was hers, all 40 acres, the historic house, the outbuildings, and whatever secrets they might contain. As she approached the clerk's desk to complete the paperwork, she felt a curious mixture of elation and trepidation, as though she had set something in motion that was larger than herself. It wasn't until she was signing the final documents that Linda became aware of the silver-haired man standing nearby, watching her with undisguised interest. When she had finished, he approached with the confident stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Congratulations on your purchase," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Nathan Cooper Development Group." Linda accepted the handshake, noting the firmness of his grip. "Linda Morris. Thank you." Cooper's smile didn't quite reach his pale blue eyes. "The Oakwood property is an interesting acquisition. May I ask what you plan to do with it?" "Live there," Linda answered simply. "It's going to be a home for my children and me." Something flickered across Cooper's face, disappointment perhaps, or recalculation. "I see. Well, old houses like that can be money pits. If you find the renovation costs overwhelming, my company is always interested in acquiring properties in the Riverbend area." He offered a business card, which Linda accepted reflexively. "We're developing a luxury resort that will revitalize the local economy. The Oakwood parcel would make an excellent addition." Before Linda could formulate a response, a new voice joined the conversation, deep, resonant, and carrying the subtle cadence of old Virginia. "The Oakwood farm has stood for nearly 2 centuries, Mr. Cooper. I suspect it will endure long after your resort becomes just another footnote in the county records." Linda turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 60s regarding Cooper with undisguised contempt. Despite the gray liberally streaking his dark hair and the lines etched around his eyes, He carried himself with the straight-backed bearing of a much younger man. Cooper's expression hardened momentarily before resolving into practiced affability. "Robert Sullivan," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Still fighting progress at every turn I see." "A still confusing destruction with progress, Nathan," Sullivan countered evenly. He turned to Linda, his stern expression warming. "Robert Sullivan, ma'am. I run the Riverbend Historical Society and Museum. The Oakwood property has significant historical value to our community." Cooper checked his watch with exaggerated impatience. "I'm sure Ms. Morris isn't interested in a history lecture at the moment." He nodded to Linda. "Remember my offer if you change your mind. Old houses and their histories can become burdens." As Cooper strode away, Linda turned to Sullivan with curiosity. "You seem to know a lot about the Oakwood farm." "I've studied the history of this county for 30 years. Sullivan replied, his deep-set eyes assessing her with frank interest. "The Oakwood farm figures prominently in local lore, though much of its true history remains undocumented." Linda hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Would you know anything about this?" She produced the pocket watch Jake had found, its tarnished surface catching the fluorescent light. Sullivan's breath caught audibly as he accepted the timepiece with reverent hands. He carefully opened the case, examining the engraved initials. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice low with suppressed excitement. "My son found it by one of the boundary stones last week when we visited the property." Sullivan closed the watch gently and returned it to her. "H.O. would be Hannah Oakwood, the original owner's daughter, born around 1820. This watch is a significant historical artifact." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Ms. Morris, I believe your purchase may be more consequential than you realize. The Oakwood farm has been the subject of local legends for generations." "What kind of legends?" "The kind that powerful men like Nathan Cooper would prefer to remain buried," Sullivan answered cryptically. "I'd be happy to share what I know if you're interested, and perhaps offer some assistance with your renovation plans to preserve the historical integrity of the property." Linda sensed there was more to Sullivan's offer than simple historical interest, but something in his weathered face inspired trust. "I'd appreciate that, Mr. Sullivan. I'm planning to move in next weekend, but there's a lot of work to be done before then." "Call me Robert," he insisted, offering her a card of his own, far less glossy than Cooper's, but somehow more substantial. "And congratulations on your new home, Miss Morris. I think you'll find the Oakwood farm has been waiting for someone like you." As Linda drove back to the city that evening, the deed to the Oakwood farm secure in her briefcase and the mysterious pocket watch in her purse, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something larger than a simple real estate transaction. Cooper's thinly veiled interest in the property, Sullivan's cryptic comments about its historical significance, Mabel Jackson's assertion that the land chose its keepers all suggested currents flowing beneath the surface of her impulsive purchase. But as she pulled into the parking lot of their apartment building and saw Jake and Lily's faces pressed eagerly against the window, waiting for news, any misgivings were overwhelmed by a surge of maternal pride. She had done it, secured a real home for her children, with room to grow and explore, fresh air to breathe, and a chance to put down roots in soil that had nurtured generations before them. Whatever secrets the Oakwood farm might hold, they would face them together. The moving truck departed late Sunday afternoon, leaving Linda and the twins standing amid a chaos of boxes and furniture in what would become their living room. The past week had been a whirlwind of packing, paperwork, and preparations, leaving little time for reflection on the magnitude of the change they were undertaking. Now, as the September twilight deepened outside the many-paned windows, the reality of their situation settled around them, like dust motes in the fading light. The house was solid, but showing its age, peeling wallpaper-worn floorboards hidden beneath decades-old linoleum plumbing that groaned and shuddered. Yet beneath these superficial flaws lay undeniable character and craftsmanship, high ceilings with intricate moldings, a grand central staircase with a hand-carved banister, fireplaces in every room with mantles of locally quarried stone. "Can we explore outside before it gets dark?" Lily asked, already edging toward the front door, her brother close behind. Linda nodded, grateful for a moment alone to gather her thoughts. "Stay within sight of the house," she called after them. "And don't go near the old barn until we've had it checked." As the screen door slammed behind the children, Linda sank onto a chair, momentarily overwhelmed by the enormity of what she had undertaken. Her modest savings, combined with her grandmother's inheritance, had been just enough for the down payment and immediate repairs. The mortgage payments would stretch her librarian's salary to its limits. There would be no margin for error, no room for unexpected expenses. A knock at the front door interrupted her worrying. Through the wavy glass, she recognized Robert Sullivan's broad-shouldered silhouette. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said when she opened the door, his arms laden with what appeared to be housewarming gifts, a foil-covered push, a bottle of wine, and a thick leather-bound book. "Thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal amid the chaos of moving day." Linda accepted the offerings, gratefully ushering him into the kitchen, where she had managed to unpack the essential items. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, unwrapping the dish to discover a fragrant lasagna still warm. "Small town welcome," Sullivan replied with a modest shrug. "Besides, I have ulterior motives." He gestured to the leather book he had placed on the counter. "The Historical Society maintains records on all the significant properties in the county. I thought you might be interested in the Oakwood file." As Linda set out plates for the unexpected dinner, Sullivan explained that he had been documenting the history of Riverbend's oldest families for decades. The Oakwoods, he noted, were among the most fascinating and mysterious. "The farm was established in 1835 by Thomas Oakwood," Sullivan explained as they sat at the kitchen table, the lasagna sending up wisps of aromatic steam. "But it was his daughter Hannah who truly shaped its legacy. Educated in Philadelphia, unusual for women, then she returned to Riverbend in 1848 under somewhat mysterious circumstances. The watch had her initials," Linda remembered. "H.O." Sullivan nodded, his eyes lighting with scholarly enthusiasm. "Hannah was remarkable, by all accounts educated, independent, and possessed of strong convictions at a time when women were expected to be decorative and compliant." He opened the leather-bound volume, revealing carefully preserved documents and photographs. "This is the only known image of her." Linda studied the sepia-toned photograph of a solemn-faced young woman in mid-19th century dress, her dark hair parted in the middle and pulled back severely, her eyes direct and challenging even across the span of nearly 2 centuries. "She looks formidable," Linda observed. "By all accounts she was, and controversial." Sullivan turned a few pages, revealing newspaper clippings yellowed with age. In the decade before the Civil War, this area was deeply divided over the issue of slavery. The Oakwood farm became the subject of rumors, whispers, that it might be a station on the Underground Railroad. Linda looked up sharply. "Was it? That's where historical record and local legend blur," Sullivan admitted. "No conclusive evidence was ever found, though suspicions ran high. What we do know is that Hannah never married, maintained the farm after her father's death, and was known for her literacy and interest in politics, all unusual for women of her station at that time." Their conversation was interrupted by the twins' return, their clothes smudged with dirt from their explorations and their eyes bright with excitement. "Mom, there's an old apple orchard behind the house," Jake announced, "and a little pond with frogs," Lily added breathlessly. Sullivan greeted the children warmly, his stern features softening as he listened to their discoveries. After introducing them, Linda sent the twins to wash up for the unexpected dinner, grateful for Sullivan's thoughtfulness. As they ate, Sullivan shared age-appropriate stories about the history of Riverbend, clearly accustomed to captivating young audiences through his work at the Historical Society. The children, initially shy, soon peppered him with questions about the farm and its former occupants. "Were there other kids who lived here?" Lily wanted to know. "Indeed there were," Sullivan confirmed. "The Oakwood family continued for several generations. Thomas and his wife had 3 children, Hannah and her 2 younger brothers. Her brother James had 4 children, and the family continued to work the farm until the mid-20th century, when agricultural challenges forced many small farms to consolidate or close." "Is that why the last owner died without heirs?" Linda asked, remembering the circumstances that had led to the sheriff's sale. A shadow crossed Sullivan's weathered face. "Not exactly. Alfred Oakwood, the last owner, was a complicated man. He became increasingly reclusive in his later years. When he died in 2013, the county discovered he had been living without electricity or running water for nearly a decade, though he had the means to maintain the property properly. No will was ever found and no relatives came forward." "That's sad," Jake said solemnly, pushing his empty plate away. "It is," Sullivan agreed. "But houses like this one, houses with history, sometimes need the right people to bring them back to life." His gaze met Linda's across the table. "I believe the Oakwood farm has been waiting for a family like yours." After the meal, as the twins helped clear the dishes, Sullivan lowered his voice. There's something else you should know, Linda. Nathan Cooper has been systematically acquiring properties throughout this area for his resort development. The Oakwood Farm is a crucial piece of his planned puzzle. It would provide the scenic backdrop for the main complex. Linda frowned, remembering Cooper's calculating gaze at the auction. That explains his interest. Cooper is not a man accustomed to having his plans thwarted, Sullivan warned. He has considerable influence with certain county officials. I wouldn't be surprised if you encounter some administrative obstacles in the coming weeks. What kind of obstacles? Permit delays, zoning questions, sudden tax reassessments. Cooper has used all these tactics before. Sullivan's expression hardened. I know his methods intimately. We were business partners years ago before I recognized what he was willing to sacrifice in the name of progress. The personal history behind Sullivan's evident animosity toward Cooper intrigued Linda, but before she could inquire further, Lily appeared in the doorway, her face a portrait of childish confusion. "Mom, what's a root cellar?" she asked. "Jake says there's one under the kitchen, but I think he's making it up." Sullivan's attention sharpened visibly. "The house does indeed have a root cellar," he confirmed. "Many homes of this vintage used underground storage to preserve food before refrigeration. The entrance should be through a trap door in the kitchen floor." Led by the excited twins, they located the heavy oak door set into the floor near the pantry. Decades of linoleum had been laid around it, but the outline was unmistakable once they knew to look for it. Sullivan and Linda worked together to pry it open, revealing a set of steep stone steps descending into darkness. "Cool," Jake exclaimed, already poised to plunge into the unknown depths. Linda caught him by the collar. "Hang on, Explorer. We need flashlights first, and I'm not sure it's safe." "The structure should be sound," Sullivan assured her, producing a powerful flashlight from his pocket. "These old cellars were built to last. May I?" At Linda's nod, he directed the beam down the stone steps, illuminating a spacious underground room with walls of fitted stone. Dusty shelves lined the perimeter, still holding ancient glass jars with contents long since decayed. The air that rose from the opening carried the earthy scent of undisturbed decades. "Can we go down?" Lily pleaded. "Not tonight," Linda decided firmly. "It needs to be cleaned and checked for safety first." Seeing their disappointment, she added, "But exploring the root cellar can be a project for next weekend, something to look forward to." As the evening concluded and Sullivan prepared to leave, he paused at the front door. "The Historical Society would be very interested in documenting any artifacts you might find as you renovate," he mentioned casually. "The Oakwood Farm has been inaccessible to researchers for so long. There's no telling what historical treasures might be hidden away." Something in his tone suggested more than academic interest, but Linda was too tired from the day's exertions to probe deeper. "I'll keep that in mind," she promised, genuinely grateful for his kindness and the wealth of information he had shared. After Sullivan's departure, as Linda tucked the twins into their new bedrooms, the first time they'd had separate rooms in their young lives, she felt a curious sense of rightness, despite the daunting task ahead. The old house creaked and settled around them, its sounds unfamiliar, yet somehow welcoming. "Mom," Jake asked sleepily as she kissed his forehead, "do you think this house has secrets?" Linda thought of Sullivan's veiled warnings, Cooper's predatory interest in the mysterious pocket watch that now rested in her bedside drawer. "All old houses have stories, honey," she answered carefully. "Maybe we'll discover some of this one's as we make it our home." As she descended the grand staircase, trailing her fingers along the smooth banister polished by generations of hands, Linda felt a profound connection to the women who had maintained this house before her, particularly Hannah Oakwood, with her direct gaze and formidable reputation. What challenges had she faced as a single woman managing a farm in the tumultuous decade before the Civil War? What courage had it taken to stand by her convictions in a divided community? Linda paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the graceful curves of the banister, the elegant proportions of the entryway. Despite its shabby current state, the house radiated dignity and purpose. Sullivan was right, it deserved to be preserved, not demolished for Cooper's resort. With renewed determination, Linda retrieved the Historical Society's leather-bound volume from the kitchen and settled onto the living room sofa, prepared to learn everything she could about the legacy she had unwittingly inherited, along with the deed to the Oakwood Farm. The first week in their new home established a rhythm of renovation and exploration. While contractors addressed critical repairs to the plumbing and electrical systems, Linda spent evenings stripping decades of wallpaper in the main rooms and uncovering layers of the house's history with each peeling sheet. The twins, thrilled with the freedom of 40 acres to roam, appointed themselves official explorers, returning each afternoon with reports of new discoveries. A collapsed gazebo almost hidden by overgrowth, stone steps leading to what might have been a spring house, the remains of a kitchen garden now wild with herbs. On Saturday morning, Linda finally tackled the root cellar armed with cleaning supplies and a powerful work light borrowed from Sullivan. The twins, despite their initial enthusiasm, quickly lost interest in the tedious work of clearing cobwebs and sweeping decades of dust from the stone steps and shelves. "Why don't you two map the boundary stones?" Linda suggested, recalling Jake's discovery of the pocket watch. "Count how many there are around the property line." This new mission dispatched the children into the autumn sunshine, leaving Linda alone with the methodical work of transforming the cellar from a forbidding cavern into a usable storage space. As she cleared the ancient shelves, she noted the expert craftsmanship of the stone walls, each block perfectly fitted to its neighbors without visible mortar in most places. It was while cleaning the far corner that Linda noticed something odd, a slight variation in the stonework, a rectangular section where the color of the mortar differed subtly from the surrounding wall. Running her fingers along the edge where the variation began, she felt a barely perceptible gap. "That's strange," she murmured, applying gentle pressure to the area. The stone shifted slightly under her hand. Heart suddenly racing, Linda examined the section more carefully. What had appeared to be solid stone wall now revealed itself as a disguised door, its edges masterfully concealed by expert masonry, but betrayed by the slightly different colored mortar used to seal it. "Jake, Lily," she called up the stairs, "bring me the large flashlight from the kitchen drawer." Within moments, the twins clattered down the stone steps, eyes wide with anticipation. "Did you find treasure?" Jake asked breathlessly. "Not exactly." Linda hedged, unwilling to raise expectations before understanding what she had discovered. "But I found something interesting in the wall. I need more light to see what it is." With the powerful beam illuminating the corner, Linda pressed against the rectangular section, feeling it give slightly. Applying steady pressure and pushing to the left, she felt the stone door grudgingly move on hidden hinges, revealing darkness beyond. "It's a secret room," Lily whispered, awestruck, "like in Harry Potter." The flashlight beam penetrated the darkness, revealing a small chamber lined with stone. Unlike the root cellar, which had clearly been accessed and used throughout the house's history, this hidden room appeared to have been deliberately sealed and concealed from casual discovery. As the light swept across the chamber, Linda gasped audibly. The room contained a small desk, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, and most remarkably, an antique printing press. Every surface was covered with a thick layer of dust, undisturbed for what must have been generations. "What is it, Mom?" Jake asked, peering anxiously from behind her. "I'm not sure," Linda replied honestly, her librarian's training already registering the historical significance of what they had found. "But I think we just discovered something very important." Cautioning the children to remain at the entrance, Linda carefully approached the desk where several leather-bound books lay open, their pages covered in neat handwriting, the ink faded to brown with age. The date at the top of the visible page read April 15th, 1853. On the wall hung a framed newspaper clipping, yellowed and brittle with age. The headline, still legible despite the fading ink, read, "Local woman charged with seditious writings, publisher of Freedom's Herald, remains unknown." Linda's mind raced as she connected the pieces: Hannah Oakwood's Philadelphia education, the rumors about the farm's connection to the Underground Railroad, the hidden chamber with its printing press and documents. This wasn't just an interesting historical footnote, it was potentially significant evidence of resistance to slavery in pre-Civil War Virginia. "Mom, is it treasure?" Lily persisted, her voice echoing slightly in the stone chamber. Linda turned to her children, understanding that they had indeed found treasure, though not the kind that glittered. "It's a different kind of treasure, sweetheart. It's history, important history, that's been waiting a very long time to be discovered." As she ushered the children back upstairs, promising to investigate further with expert help, Linda's thoughts turned immediately to Robert Sullivan. His evident interest in the Oakwood Farm's history, his veiled references to its significance, his animosity toward Cooper's development plans, all suggested he had suspected something like this might exist on the property. In the kitchen, Linda reached for her phone, then hesitated. The discovery felt momentous, deserving of more than a hasty call, and something in Sullivan's careful phrasing throughout their conversations hinted that he had been deliberate in not sharing all he knew, perhaps waiting to see what she might find on her own. The antique pocket watch sat on the counter where she had left it that morning, intending to polish its tarnished surface. Linda picked it up, opening the case to reveal the delicate clock face and the initials HO. The watch now seemed less like a chance discovery and more like a deliberate breadcrumb leading them toward the hidden chamber and its secrets. Had Jake really found it just sitting atop one of the boundary stones? Or had it been placed there, a silent message from the past reaching forward through time to ensure that Hannah Oakwood's hidden legacy would eventually be discovered? "Mom, can we call Mr. Sullivan and tell him what we found?" Jake asked, interrupting her reverie. Linda closed the watch case gently. "Yes, I think Mr. Sullivan would be very interested in our discovery. But first, let's take some photographs to document everything exactly as we found it." As the children raced to retrieve her digital camera, Linda stood in the quiet kitchen, the weight of historical responsibility settling on her shoulders. The Oakwood farm had harbored secrets that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal, secrets that now had been entrusted to her care. Whatever Nathan Cooper's plans for luxury development, whatever influence he might wield with local officials, Linda knew with sudden clarity that she would fight to protect the farm and its hidden history with every resource at her disposal. Not just for her family's new home, but for Hannah Oakwood's legacy and the larger historical narrative it represented. "The land chooses its keepers," Mabel Jackson had said. Standing in the autumn sunlight streaming through windows that had witnessed nearly 2 centuries of American history, Linda finally understood what the elderly neighbor had meant, and she was ready to accept the responsibility that came with being chosen. The morning after discovering the hidden chamber, Linda woke before dawn, her mind racing with questions about what lay beneath her new home. Instead of tackling the planned living room renovation, she found herself drawn back to the root cellar, standing in the hidden room as early light filtered through the narrow ground-level window. Linda studied the space with growing amazement, not just as an unusual discovery, but as a deliberate creation that someone had painstakingly concealed. The printing press dominated the small room, a cast-iron hand press, its mechanisms frozen with age but remarkably intact. As a librarian with a minor in American history, Linda recognized it as a Washington-style press, the kind used by small newspaper operations and pamphlet printers in the mid-19th century. "This wasn't just hidden," she murmured to herself, running her hand along the dust-covered desk. "It was preserved." Linda examined the room more carefully in the daylight. The stone walls had been expertly fitted to prevent moisture damage. Small glass containers still held dried-out ink. The bookshelves contained not only journals but bound collections of what appeared to be the mysterious Freedom's Herald publication mentioned in the newspaper clipping, each volume carefully labeled by year from 1850 to 1863. As she moved through the space-disturbing decades of settled dust, Linda was struck by the deliberate nature of the concealment. Whoever had sealed this room had intended it to be found eventually, but only by someone who would appreciate its significance. Back in the kitchen, Linda made a pot of coffee and contemplated her next steps. Her instinct was to call Sullivan immediately, but something held her back, a desire to understand more about what she had found before sharing it, even with someone who had been so helpful. Opening her laptop, Linda began researching pre-Civil War abolitionist publications in Virginia. Most sources indicated that such activities had been concentrated in the North, with few documented cases of abolitionist printing in southern states where such work carried severe legal penalties. After an hour of research, Linda found a brief mention of Freedom's Herald in a scholarly article about anonymous abolitionist publications. The author noted that the Herald had been unusual for its eloquent prose and sophisticated arguments, suggesting its writer had formal education rare for the period, particularly in rural Virginia. The publication had first appeared in 1850, shortly after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, and had circulated primarily through secret networks. Authorities had never identified its publisher or printing location despite considerable efforts. Linda sat back processing the implications. If Hannah Oakwood had indeed been the publisher of Freedom's Herald, operating a secret press on the farm for over a decade during the most volatile period of pre-Civil War America, the historical significance was enormous. The twins' voices raised in some minor dispute outside brought Linda back to the present moment. The magnitude of her discovery would have to wait. Her children needed breakfast, and the day's practical tasks required attention. As she prepared pancakes, Linda decided to contact Sullivan that afternoon. Whatever his reasons for not sharing his suspicions about the hidden chamber, his expertise would be invaluable in properly documenting and preserving what they had found. The decision made Linda called the children in for breakfast, temporarily setting aside thoughts of hidden presses and secret publications for the more immediate concerns of maple syrup distribution and setting ground rules for Saturday activities. It wasn't until mid-afternoon, after supervising the twins' homework and beginning work on the upstairs bathroom's plumbing issues, that Linda finally made the call to Sullivan. His response to her carefully worded description of their discovery was immediate and profound. "You found the press," he said, his deep voice hushed with what sounded like reverence. "After all these years, I'll be there in 30 minutes. True to his word, Sullivan's truck rumbled up the gravel driveway precisely half an hour later. He emerged carrying what appeared to be professional camera equipment and archival supplies, his weathered face alight with barely contained excitement. "I suspected," he explained as Linda led him toward the root cellar, the twins trailing behind like eager puppies. There were references in county records, oblique mentions in letters and diaries, just enough to suggest the possibility. But no one has had access to thoroughly search the property since Alfred became reclusive in the 1990s. In the hidden chamber, Sullivan moved with the reverent precision of a man accustomed to handling historical artifacts. He documented everything with methodical care: the position of each item, the dimensions of the room, the construction of the disguised door. "This is the Washington Press Model 1834, he confirmed, examining the iron frame with a small flashlight. "Perfect for clandestine printing. Relatively quiet, could be operated by a single person, and produced remarkably clean text for its time." He turned to the bound volumes with gloved hands, carefully opening the earliest collection. "Freedom's Herald, Volume 1, 1850, he read from the title page. "My God, the complete archives." "Do you understand what you found, Linda?" Before she could respond, Sullivan located an inscription written in elegant script on the inside cover. "Let truth be told that freedom may follow. H.O." Beneath it, in a different hand, someone had added, "The truth remains hidden until the world is ready to hear it. The key lies with the seventh generation." E.O., 1899. E.O. would be Ezra Oakwood, Hannah's nephew, who inherited the farm after her death, Sullivan explained. "He must have been the one who sealed the room." "The seventh generation," Linda echoed. "From Hannah, that would be potentially alive today," Sullivan completed the thought, though the direct Oakwood line ended with Alfred. For hours, they carefully examined and cataloged the chamber's contents, Sullivan sharing what was known about Freedom's Herald and its anonymous publisher. The publication had first appeared shortly after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, its articulate arguments against slavery causing considerable controversy. Authorities were desperate to identify the publisher, Sullivan explained, as they examined a particularly powerful issue from 1855. The writing showed classical education that was unusual for the period. Some suspected a northern academic writing under a pseudonym. Others thought it might be the work of several authors presenting as one. But it was Hannah Oakwood all along, Linda mused, carefully examining a portrait they'd found among the journals, clearly the same young woman from the Historical Society's records. "It appears so," Sullivan agreed. "And from these journals, we can see she had helped a network of collaborators who distributed the publication while keeping her identity secret. By early evening, they had documented the most significant artifacts and developed a preliminary preservation plan." Sullivan made several calls to colleagues at the State Historical Society, arranging for conservation experts to properly assess the materials. "I cannot overstate the historical significance of what you've discovered," Sullivan said earnestly as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing their findings while the twins ate dinner. "This will reshape our understanding of abolitionist activism in this region." "What happens next?" Linda asked, still processing the magnitude of their discovery. "With your permission, I'd like to bring in a professional conservation team to properly preserve these materials," Sullivan explained. "The journals, the printing press, and particularly the complete collection of Freedom's Herald, these are irreplaceable historical treasures." "Of course," Linda agreed readily, "but they'd remain here, right on the property where they were created." Sullivan exchanged a glance with Jake, who had been listening intently while pretending not to. "Ideally, yes," he said carefully. "The historical context of the location adds significant value. A preserved site with original artifacts in their original location would be the best outcome from a historical perspective. But, Linda prompted, sensing his hesitation. But proper preservation requires controlled environmental conditions, security, and ongoing maintenance, Sullivan explained. That would require significant funding and infrastructure that's typically beyond what a private homeowner can provide. Linda nodded slowly, understanding the implications. Her discovery was too significant to remain simply a private curiosity in her basement. It belonged in some sense to history itself. There might be grants available for historical preservation, Sullivan suggested, seeing her expression. The site could potentially qualify for designation on the National Register of Historic Places, which would open up preservation funding options. As they continued discussing possibilities, Linda's phone chimed with a text message from the contractor she'd hired for the kitchen renovation. County says there's an issue with your permits. All work stopped until resolved. Call ASAP. Linda frowned at the message. She'd carefully filed all the necessary paperwork weeks ago, and the initial permits had already been approved. This sudden issue seemed suspiciously timed. What she couldn't know was that news of unusual activity at the Oakwood farm, specifically Sullivan's extended visit and the arrival of his Historical Society vehicle, had already reached Nathan Cooper. The developer had immediately activated his connections at the county offices to gather information and create obstacles. Problem, Sullivan asked, noting her expression. Permit issues, apparently, Linda replied, showing him the message. The contractor can't continue until it's resolved. Sullivan's face darkened. And so it begins, he murmured. Cooper's first move. You think he's behind this? I'd stake my reputation on it. Sullivan's jaw tightened. Nathan doesn't waste time once he identifies an obstacle to his plans. Your discovery represents exactly the kind of complication he excels at bulldozing, literally and figuratively. As Linda called the contractor to get details, Sullivan continued examining the historical materials they had brought upstairs. His expression shifted suddenly as he turned a page in one of Hannah's journals. Linda, he called softly when she had finished her call. Look at this entry from 1856. He pointed to a passage written in what appeared to be a simple substitution cipher, with a translation penciled faintly beneath in a different hand. 2 more passengers arrive safely tonight, guided by the stone markers. JW and family proceed north tomorrow with T as guide. The children ages 4 and 6 show remarkable courage despite their ordeal. I am more convinced than ever that our cause is just, though the dangers increase daily. The stone markers, Linda breathed. The boundary stones where Jake found the watch. Sullivan nodded grimly. Not just property markers. They were directional guides for the Underground Railroad. He turned the page, revealing a crude map with the stones clearly marked, forming a line that continued beyond the farm's boundaries. The Oakwood farm wasn't just the source of abolitionist publications, it was an active station on the Underground Railroad network. The full weight of what they had discovered settled over the kitchen. This wasn't merely an interesting historical footnote. It was concrete evidence of resistance to one of the darkest chapters in American history, a resistance centered on this very house where Linda and her children now lived. Cooper can't be allowed to destroy this, Sullivan said with quiet intensity. This site represents a unique opportunity to preserve and understand a crucial piece of our past. Linda thought of the permit issues, suddenly understanding the battle that likely lay ahead. We'll need help, she said, her voice steady despite the apprehension churning in her stomach. Yes, Sullivan agreed, his eyes meeting hers with unexpected warmth. But you won't face this alone. There are people in this community who have waited generations for Hannah's story to be told, people who will stand with you against Cooper and his development plans. Like who? Linda asked. Before Sullivan could answer, Lily burst into the kitchen, her eyes wide with excitement. Mom, I found something else, she exclaimed, holding out a tarnished metal object. It was under the floorboard in my room when I dropped my pencil through the crack. Linda carefully took the item, a small brass key with an unusual design on its head. Sullivan examined it closely, his breath catching. This symbol, it matches one used in Freedom's Herald as a signature mark. Where exactly did you find this, Lily? The little girl led them upstairs to her bedroom where a floorboard had indeed come loose. Beneath it was a small hollow space containing a metal box about the size of a thick book. With trembling hands, Linda tried the key. It fit perfectly, turning with a well-preserved click despite the decades. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger in a sealed envelope with "For the Seventh Generation" written in faded ink. Sullivan carefully opened the ledger to reveal meticulous records of people who had passed through the Oakwood farm on their journey to freedom, names, dates, and destinations all recorded in Hannah's distinctive handwriting. "This is extraordinary," he whispered. "A complete record of Hannah's work with the Underground Railroad. This alone would be historically priceless." Linda carefully opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a letter dated October 15, 1870, to the finder of this record. "If you are reading this, you have discovered the truth I was forced to conceal during my lifetime. My work with Freedom's Herald and the assistance I provided to those escaping bondage were kept secret of necessity, for such actions were considered crimes by the laws of men, though justified by the higher law of conscience. I have instructed my nephew Ezra to seal my printing room and preserve these records when I am gone to be revealed, when our nation has evolved beyond the prejudices that make such secrecy necessary. The full accounting of my work is contained in my journals and in this ledger. The true history of this farm is one of resistance against injustice. May whoever owns this land in the future honor its legacy. Hannah Oakwood." The letter continued with specific instructions about the preservation of her records and printing presses, revealing that Hannah had deliberately created the hidden chamber as a time capsule, hoping that future generations would understand and value her dangerous work. "This changes everything," Sullivan said, after they had documented the new discoveries. "With this letter and ledger, along with the preserved printing press and journals, the historical case becomes undeniable. This property represents a unique and irreplaceable piece of American history." As Sullivan prepared to leave that evening, promising to return the next day, with colleagues who could help assess the preservation needs more thoroughly, he paused at the front door. "Cooper will fight this," he warned, his expression grave. "He's invested millions in the preliminary work for his resort, and he's not a man who accepts defeat gracefully. The permit issue is just the beginning." Linda straightened her shoulders, Hannah's letter still vivid in her mind. "Then we'll fight back. This farm stood for something important once. It can again." Sullivan's weathered face broke into an unexpected smile. "Hannah would have liked you," he said simply. Then with a courteous nod, he departed into the gathering darkness. After tucking the twins into bed, Linda stood on the front porch, gazing out at the limestone fence posts silhouetted against the night sky. Posts that she now understood had once guided desperate travelers to safety, their positioning carefully calculated to appear ordinary to casual observers, while providing clear directions to those who knew their secret. The cool October breeze carried the scent of earth and aging leaves, connecting her to seasons past, when the same wind had whispered through the same trees, witnessed the same stars, and perhaps carried away the sound of Hannah's printing press working through the night to spread words of freedom. Linda's hand closed around the pocket watch in her sweater pocket, feeling its solid weight a tangible connection to the remarkable woman whose legacy now rested in her hands. Whatever challenges Nathan Cooper might bring, whatever obstacles might arise in the days ahead, Linda knew with bone-deep certainty that she would fight to preserve the Oakwood farm and the hidden history it contained. "The land chooses its keepers," Mabel had said, and Linda Morris was ready to be chosen. The following morning, Linda awoke to the sound of tires on gravel. Peering through her bedroom curtains, she saw Robert Sullivan's truck pull up, followed by two unfamiliar vehicles. As she hurriedly dressed, Linda contemplated how quickly her life had changed in just 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she had been focused on renovation plans and budget constraints. Now she was preparing to meet with historical experts about a discovery that might reshape understanding of pre-Civil War resistance movements. By the time she reached the kitchen, the twins were already peering curiously out the window at the visitors gathering on the front lawn. "Is Mr. Sullivan bringing more people to see our secret room?" Jake asked, his breath fogging the glass. "Yes," Linda confirmed, quickly starting coffee. "These are historians who can help us understand what we found and how to protect it." Outside, Sullivan was introducing a tall, distinguished black man in his mid-60s and a younger woman carrying professional camera equipment. As Linda opened the door to greet them, Sullivan's expression held a mixture of excitement and urgency. "Linda, this is Dr. Marcus Freeman from the State University History Department, our foremost expert on abolitionist movements," Sullivan said, gesturing to the tall man. "And this is Abigail Chen, our conservation specialist from the Historical Society." Our Freeman shook Linda's hand firmly, his deep-set eyes assessing her with frank interest. Robert called me at midnight. He explained, his resonant voice carrying the measured cadence of a lifelong educator. I've studied Freedom's Herald for 30 years trying to identify its source. If what he described is accurate, you've made one of the most significant historical discoveries in this field in decades. As they moved toward the root cellar entrance, Sullivan explained that Dr. Freeman had written the definitive scholarly work on anonymous abolitionist publications in the border states. Marcus has been trying to convince skeptical colleagues for years that Freedom's Herald originated in Virginia rather than being smuggled in from the north. The writing style and regional references always suggested a local author, Dr. Freeman elaborated as they descended the stone steps. But without concrete evidence, many dismissed the possibility as unlikely given the considerable dangers involved. In the hidden chamber, Dr. Freeman moved with reverent care, examining each artifact with the practiced eye of a scholar who had spent a lifetime piecing together historical puzzles from fragmentary evidence. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the earliest volume of Freedom's Herald. "My God," he whispered, carefully turning pages. "The original printing plates are still here, preserved in these drawers. And these editorial notes in the margins. This is beyond anything I could have hoped to find." While Dr. Freeman documented the publications, Abigail Chen assessed the preservation challenges, taking detailed measurements of humidity levels and structural conditions. The room's construction was remarkably forward-thinking, she noted. The stone walls have protected the contents from moisture, and the hidden entrance prevented light damage. Whoever sealed this chamber understood preservation principles well ahead of their time. As the experts worked, Linda observed the careful thoroughness of their methods, recognizing the profound responsibility that had fallen to her as the steward of this unexpected historical treasure. When Jake and Lily grew restless, she sent them outside to play, knowing the detailed work would quickly bore them. By mid-morning, De Freeman had confirmed what Sullivan suspected: the materials in the hidden chamber constituted irrefutable evidence that Hannah Oakwood was indeed the anonymous publisher of Freedom's Herald, operating a clandestine press on her farm throughout the tumultuous 1850s and during the Civil War itself. Her courage was extraordinary, Dr. Freeman said, examining Hannah's journals. If discovered, she would have faced severe legal penalties, possibly imprisonment, and certainly violent reprisals from pro-slavery factions. Why would she take such risks? Linda asked, trying to understand the woman whose home she now occupied. Dr. Freeman looked up from the journal. Her own words provide the answer, he said carefully, reading from an entry dated 1854. "I cannot in good conscience remain silent while human beings are bought and sold as cattle within sight of my home. If words have power to change minds, then the pen must become my sword in this battle for the soul of our nation." The profound moral clarity of Hannah's commitment resonated across the centuries, humbling in its courage and conviction. As Linda absorbed the weight of this legacy, Sullivan's phone rang, breaking the reverent atmosphere. His expression darkened as he listened to the caller. That was James Harrington, a lawyer friend, who serves on the Historical Society Board, he explained after ending the call. "Cooper's moving quickly. He's filed a formal complaint with the county, claiming your property purchase violated procedural requirements for the sheriff's sale. There's an expedited hearing scheduled for next Friday." Linda felt her stomach tighten. "Can he actually invalidate my purchase?" "Not legitimately," Sullivan replied grimly. "But legitimacy isn't always Cooper's primary concern. He has considerable influence with certain county officials." "What's the basis for his complaint?" Dr. Freeman asked, his scholarly detachment giving way to evident concern. "He's claiming the auction notice wasn't properly advertised in all required publications," Sullivan explained. "It's a technicality, but one that could potentially force a new auction if the right officials choose to accept his argument, which Cooper would ensure he wins," Linda concluded, understanding the threat. Her modest savings had been completely depleted by the down payment and initial repairs. She had no resources to compete in a new auction against Cooper's development company. "Precisely," Sullivan confirmed. "Meanwhile, Harrington says Cooper's people are pulling all your permit applications for special review by the building department. Classic delaying tactics." Dr. Freeman straightened to his full imposing height. "Then we must accelerate the historical designation process," he stated firmly. "I'll contact colleagues at the State Historic Preservation Office immediately. With artifacts of this significance, we should qualify for emergency consideration. I'll document everything for the application. Abigail added, already photographing the printing press from multiple angles. The combination of the press-complete publication archives and Underground Railroad documentation makes this site uniquely valuable. Sullivan nodded agreement. I'll have Harrington prepare legal counter-arguments for the hearing. Cooper's playing his usual game, creating bureaucratic obstacles while building momentum for his development to seem inevitable. As the experts continued their work, Linda retreated to the kitchen, overwhelmed by the sudden storm gathering around her family's new home. The simple dream of providing a stable environment for her children had evolved overnight into a battle against a powerful developer with seemingly unlimited resources and influence. Through the window, she watched Jake and Lily playing near the ancient limestone fence posts, their laughter carrying across the autumn air. These children, who had finally found space to run and explore after years in a cramped apartment, might lose this home before they had truly claimed it. Sullivan joined her, his weathered face softened with concern. I know this is overwhelming, he said quietly. No one would blame you if you decided to accept Cooper's offer when it inevitably comes. He'll pay well above market value once he realizes what's at stake. Linda turned to him, surprised. You think I should sell to Cooper? No, Sullivan replied emphatically. I think this farm represents something historically significant that deserves preservation. But I also recognize that you're a single mother with young children and limited resources facing a battle against a very determined opponent with considerable power in this community. Linda's gaze returned to her children, now engaged in some elaborate game involving the boundary stones. Hannah Oakwood risked everything to stand for what she believed was right, she said slowly. How could I do any less to protect her legacy? Sullivan's expression warmed with evident approval. Then we'll fight this together. Cooper's powerful, but he's not invincible. And Hannah's story deserves to be preserved, not paved over for a resort swimming pool. Before Linda could respond, Dr. Freeman appeared in the doorway, his dignified face alight with discovery. You need to see this, he said urgently. We found a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of the chamber. Back in the hidden room, Abigail had carefully removed several loose planks, revealing a small cavity containing a metal document box. Inside lay several folded papers remarkably preserved. These are manumission documents, Dr. Freeman explained, handling the papers with gloved hands. Legal papers granting freedom to enslaved individuals. And look at the signatures. These were executed by Thomas Oakwood, Hannah's father, in 1835. The same year he established the farm, Sullivan noted. Exactly, Dr. Freeman confirmed. And according to these records, he freed 12 people who had been enslaved on his previous property and offered them paid employment here. This suggests that anti-slavery sentiment ran in the family even before Hannah began publishing Freedom's Herald. That would have been highly unusual in Virginia at that time, Sullivan added for Linda's benefit. Extraordinary, in fact, Dr. Freeman agreed. Most manumissions in this period occurred through wills after the owner's death, not as deliberate acts during their lifetime. Thomas Oakwood was clearly a man of uncommon principle, and Hannah appears to have carried that legacy forward in even more radical ways. The discovery added yet another layer to the farm's historical significance. Not just the site of a secret abolitionist press and Underground Railroad station, but a place established from its very founding on principles of freedom and dignity that defied the prevailing norms of its time. As the day progressed, Linda found herself increasingly drawn into the historical detective work, her librarian's training proving unexpectedly valuable as the team systematically documented each new discovery. By late afternoon, they had established a preliminary timeline of the farm's role in abolitionist activities spanning 3 decades. When Sullivan's phone chimed with an incoming message, his expression shifted from scholarly concentration to alert concern. Cooper's moving faster than expected, he announced after reading the text. He's called a press conference for tomorrow morning to announce exciting new development plans for the historic Riverbend area. Creating momentum, Dr. Freeman noted grimly, making his resort seem inevitable to increase pressure on county officials. And on me, Linda added, understanding the tactic. Sullivan nodded. He'll present his development as progress, job creation, economic revitalization, all the usual arguments. And without public knowledge of what we've discovered here, many in the community will support him. Then we need to counter with our own announcement, Dr. Freeman decided. I can contact several colleagues from major universities who specialize in this period. If we can get statements from recognized experts about the significance of this discovery, It could shift the narrative. I know someone at the regional newspaper, Abigail offered. We could provide them an exclusive on the historical discovery without revealing the exact nature of the hidden room yet for security reasons. As they developed their strategy, Linda felt a curious blend of apprehension and determination. The battle lines were being drawn with her newly purchased farm at the center of a conflict that extended far beyond property rights to questions of historical preservation and cultural memory. That evening, after the experts had departed with promises to return the following day, Linda sat on the porch swing with the twins, watching twilight settle over the autumn landscape. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, but beneath it lay a growing sense of purpose. "Mom, are we going to lose our house?" Lily asked suddenly, her perceptive gaze fixed on Linda's face. Linda pulled her daughter closer. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Mr. Sullivan and his friends are helping us protect it." "Because of the secret room?" Jake asked. "Yes," Linda confirmed. "What we found is very important not just to us, but to history. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks like Hannah did." "Was she brave?" Emma asked. Linda thought of the journal entries they'd read that day, the carefully documented risks Hannah had taken to help others escape bondage while publishing words that could have led to her arrest or worse. "Yes, very brave," Linda replied softly. "She helped people even when it was dangerous because she believed everyone deserved to be free." As darkness enveloped the farm, Linda remained on the porch after sending the children to bed. The limestone boundary stones were barely visible now, dark sentinels marking the edges of property that had once served as a beacon of hope for those seeking freedom. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sullivan. "Cooper Development filed formal objection to your permits. County building inspector coming tomorrow. Be prepared." Linda gazed out at the dark silhouettes of the boundary stones, feeling a strange sense of connection to Hannah Oakwood across the span of generations. Both women facing formidable opposition, both determined to protect what they valued, despite the risks. "The land chooses its keepers," Mabel had said. Now Linda understood the true weight of being chosen. The county building inspector arrived precisely at 9 the next morning, his official truck raising dust on the gravel driveway. Linda greeted him on the porch steps, recognizing the awkward blend of professionalism and discomfort in his demeanor. "Mrs. Morris," he began, consulting his clipboard. "I'm Thomas Reeves from the County Building Department. There's been a formal complaint about potential code violations on your property." "What kind of violations?" Linda asked, maintaining a calm she didn't entirely feel. Reeves shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Structural concerns, potential electrical issues, possible unpermitted historical modifications." He trailed off his expression, suggesting he knew how thin these pretexts were. "I'm required to conduct a full inspection and issue a report before any further renovation work can proceed." Linda recognized the situation for what it was, another delaying tactic orchestrated by Cooper, but also understood that antagonizing the inspector would only create additional problems. "Of course," she agreed cordially. "I'm happy to show you around, though we've only been here 2 weeks and haven't made any structural changes yet." As she led Reeves through the house, Linda was careful to guide him away from the root cellar entrance, explaining that the area was still being cleared and assessed. The inspector dutifully noted various minor issues, old wiring that needed updating, a sagging section of porch roof, cracked plaster in the upstairs hallway, but found nothing that would justify halting renovations entirely. "Between us, Mrs. Morris," Reeves said quietly as they completed the tour, "I don't see anything here beyond the normal issues in a house this age. But my supervisor has taken a personal interest in this inspection." Linda understood the implicit message. "And your supervisor reports to the county commissioners." Reeves nodded slightly, his expression carefully neutral. "Commissioner Davis is particularly interested in development projects in this area for economic revitalization purposes." "I understand," Linda replied, matching his neutral tone while mentally adding another piece to the puzzle of Cooper's influence. "When can I expect your report?" "Standard procedure would be 3 to 5 business days," Reeves answered, then lowered his voice. "But I've been instructed to conduct a thorough review, which could take longer." As the inspector drove away, Sullivan's truck appeared, followed by a sleek black SUV Linda didn't recognize. Sullivan emerged looking grim, accompanied by a compact, energetic man in his early 60s, whose military bearing was evident despite his civilian clothes and silver-streaked hair. "Linda, this is James Harrington," Sullivan introduced as they reached the porch. The lawyer I mentioned and a former JAG officer who doesn't intimidate easily. Harrington's handshake was firm, his assessment of Linda direct and unvarnished. Roberts filled me in on the situation, he said, dispensing with pleasantries. Cooper's moving aggressively, which tells me he's concerned about something beyond just adding your property to his development. Has he approached you directly yet? Not since the auction, Linda replied, leading them inside. He will, Harrington predicted confidently. Probably today after his press conference. He'll offer well above market value, emphasize how the sale would secure your children's future, and present himself as reasonable while suggesting that fighting him would be costly and ultimately futile. The precision of this prediction was unnerving. You seem to know his playbook well. I've opposed him in 3 previous preservation cases, Harrington explained, accepting the coffee Linda offered. Cooper's tactics are consistent, create bureaucratic obstacles, build public momentum. For his project, apply personal pressure to the property owner and leverage his relationships with key officials to smooth his path. Can he actually invalidate my purchase? Linda asked, voicing her primary concern. Harrington's expression turned serious. Not on legitimate grounds. The sheriff's sale was properly conducted. However, if Commissioner Davis is in Cooper's pocket, as seems likely, they could potentially force a review based on manufactured technicalities. So what's our counter strategy? Linda asked, surprising herself with the ready adoption of battle terminology. Multi-pronged approach, Harrington replied promptly. First, we file for emergency historical designation with both the state and national preservation offices based on the exceptional artifacts discovered. Dr. Freeman is already working on this with colleagues from 3 universities. Second, Sullivan continued, we prepare a comprehensive response to whatever spurious claims Cooper raises at the hearing, documenting every aspect of the sale's legitimacy. Third, Harrington added, we develop public support through strategic media coverage of the historical discovery, creating community investment in preservation rather than development. And fourth, as Sullivan concluded, we investigate Cooper's connections with county officials, particularly Commissioner Davis. James has contacts who can discreetly look into any potential ethics violations or conflicts of interest. The doorbell interrupted their strategy session. Through the wavy glass of the front door, Linda recognized Mabel Jackson's stooped figure leaning heavily on her cane. Beside her stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in his mid-60s who bore a striking resemblance to the elderly woman. Mabel, Linda greeted her, opening the door. Is everything all right? No, it isn't, the elderly woman replied bluntly. I saw Cooper's man inspecting your place this morning. Then I heard about his press conference. It's starting again, just like when Alfred was alive. This is my son, Benjamin, Mabel continued, gesturing to the man beside her. He has something important to tell you about the farm, something I should have told you before you bought it. Benjamin Jackson nodded respectfully to Linda, his weathered face solemn. Ma'am, I believe you found something in the root cellar, he said without preamble. Something hidden behind a false wall. The direct reference to their discovery sent a ripple of tension through the room. Sullivan moved to stand beside Linda, his posture subtly protective. How would you know about that? He asked carefully. Benjamin exchanged a glance with his mother before answering. Because we're Oakwoods, he said simply. At least we were through my grandmother's line. Hannah Oakwood's brother James had a daughter who married a Jackson. Their daughter was my mother. We're the 6th generation from Hannah, Mabel added, her faded blue eyes suddenly sharp with purpose. And we've been waiting for someone to find what she left behind. The revelation stunned the room into momentary silence. Sullivan recovered first. Why didn't you bid on the property at the sheriff's, Marion? He asked, if you knew its historical significance? We tried, Benjamin interrupted, a flash of old anger crossing his face. But suddenly the auction date was changed with minimal notice, too late for us to arrange financing. We suspected manipulation then, but couldn't prove it. Cooper, Harrington deduced immediately. He must have known or at least suspected the historical significance of the property and wanted to ensure it fell into hands he could control. But then I bought it instead, Linda said slowly, understanding dawning. A complete outsider who had no idea what she was purchasing. The land chooses its keepers, Mabel repeated her earlier cryptic statement, but now with new meaning. When we heard you'd found the pocket watch, we hoped. Jake found it by one of the boundary stones, Linda confirmed, And then we discovered the hidden chamber with the printing press in Hannah's journals. Benjamin's expression transformed with profound emotion. Then it's true, but done all of it. The stories passed down in our family about Hannah's secret work, the underground printing press, the freedom route marked by the limestone posts. For generations, we've preserved these oral histories without concrete proof. We have more than proof now, Sullivan told him. We have the complete archives of Freedom's Herald, Hannah's personal journals documenting her Underground Railroad activities, and even manumission papers showing that Thomas Oakwood freed enslaved people when he established the farm. There's something else you should know, Mabel said, lowering herself carefully onto a chair. Alfred, the last official Oakwood owner, became reclusive for a reason. Cooper's father approached him in the 1990s about selling the farm for development. When Alfred refused, strange things started happening: tax reassessments, permit problems, vandalism that was never solved. Alfred became paranoid, Benjamin continued. He shut himself away, refused all modern conveniences that would connect him to the outside world, and became determined that no one would find Hannah's legacy until Cooper was gone. He died without telling anyone where he had hidden the key to the chamber, not even us, his cousins. This new information added yet another dimension to the increasingly complex situation. The battle over the Oakwood farm wasn't just a present-day conflict between preservation and development. It was the continuation of a struggle that had been ongoing for decades, perhaps even centuries, beginning with Hannah's dangerous work in the cause of freedom. Cooper's press conference starts in an hour, Harrington noted, checking his watch. We should monitor what he says, assess his strategy. And I believe we should contact Elizabeth immediately, Benjamin added. She should be part of this. Elizabeth? Linda asked. My daughter, Benjamin explained. Catherine Elizabeth Jackson Rodriguez. She's a historian specializing in 19th century women's activism at Boston University. She's the 7th generation from Hannah Oakwood. The 7th generation. Linda recalled the inscription in Hannah's journal. The truth remains hidden until the world is ready to hear it. The key lies with the 7th generation. Call her, Linda decided immediately. If Hannah intended her story to be revealed through her descendant, Elizabeth should be here. As Benjamin stepped outside to make the call, Sullivan turned on the small television in the kitchen to monitor Cooper's press conference. The local station was already setting up for live coverage, the reporter emphasizing the economic significance of the anticipated announcement. The camera panned to show Nathan Cooper approaching a podium set up at the edge of what appeared to be a scenic overlook, the rolling Virginia countryside, providing a picturesque backdrop. Impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that screamed success and authority, Cooper projected confident charisma as he began speaking. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Riverbend, he announced, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of a skilled salesman. Cooper Development Group is proud to announce Grand Riverbend Resort, a $75 million project that will transform our community into a premier destination for tourism and recreation. The camera cut to rendered images of a sprawling resort complex featuring luxury accommodations, a golf course, and various amenities, all artfully integrated into the landscape. With a practiced gesture, Cooper indicated the surrounding countryside. This ridge will become the centerpiece of our development, offering unparalleled views of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The historic character of the area will be honored through architectural elements that pay tribute to our region's past, while creating hundreds of beaches and millions in tax revenue for our community's future. The camera returned to Cooper, who was now joined by a middle-aged man in an expensive suit whose self-important bearing suggested political office. Commissioner Davis and other county officials have been instrumental in helping us navigate the regulatory process, Cooper continued smoothly. Their vision for economic development aligns perfectly with our commitment to responsible growth. Commissioner Davis stepped forward, his practiced smile revealing two perfect teeth. The County Commission is excited to support this project, which represents exactly the kind of economic engine our region needs. We'll be working closely with Cooper Development to ensure a smooth approval process. As the press conference continued, the close relationship between Cooper and Commissioner Davis became increasingly evident. The commissioner spoke of fast-tracking permits and streamlining regulatory reviews, barely disguising his eagerness to accommodate the developer's timeline. They're not even pretending to be impartial, Harrington observed with professional disdain. Davis might as well be on Cooper's payroll. He probably is, one way or another, Sullivan replied grimly. The press conference concluded with Cooper confidently announcing a groundbreaking ceremony scheduled for the following month, a timeline that assumed no significant obstacles to his plans. As Sullivan switched off the television, Benjamin returned from his call, his expression energized. "Elizabeth is booking a flight now," he reported. "She'll arrive tomorrow morning, and she's bringing family records that might further establish the property's historical significance." "Good," Harrington said decisively. "Meanwhile, I suggest we accelerate our own media strategy. Cooper's created a narrative about economic development. We need to counter with the historical significance of what's been discovered here." Dr. Freeman is already working with colleagues from 3 universities to prepare statements, Sullivan confirmed, and Abigail Chen has contacted her friend at the regional newspaper. A knock at the door interrupted their planning. Linda opened it to find an impeccably dressed young woman holding a thick envelope. "Ms. Morris, special delivery from Mr. Cooper," she announced crisply, handing over the envelope, before returning to a luxury SUV idling in the driveway. Inside the envelope, Linda found formal paperwork offering to purchase the Oakwood farm for $850,000, nearly 4 times what she had paid just weeks earlier. A handwritten note on Cooper Development letterhead accompanied the offer. "Ms. Morris, I understand you have discovered some items of historical interest on the property. While this complicates matters, I'm prepared to be generous. This offer represents a substantial profit on your recent investment and would provide significant financial security for you and your children. The county hearing regarding procedural irregularities in your purchase is scheduled for next Friday." As you may have gathered from Commissioner Davis's public statements, the outcome is likely to be unfavorable to your interests. This offer provides an elegant solution that benefits all parties. Please consider it carefully. "Nathan Cooper." Harrington read the note over Linda's shoulder, his expression hardening. "Carrot and stick," he commented. The generous offer accompanied by the thinly veiled threat about the hearing's predetermined outcome. Classic Cooper. Linda stared at the offer amount, momentarily staggered by the figure. $850,000 would pay off her mortgage, provide college funds for the twins, and still leave enough for a comfortable home elsewhere. The practical part of her mind, the part that had struggled for years to stretch her librarian's salary to cover basic needs, recognized the financial security this offer represented. Yet something deeper rebelled at the thought of surrendering Hannah's legacy to the bulldozers. The hidden chamber with its printing press and journals, the boundary stones that had guided frightened travelers to freedom, the very soil that had provided sanctuary to those escaping bondage, all would be obliterated, replaced by resort amenities designed to pamper the wealthy. "He's expecting me to call with a counter-offer," Linda said, finally returning the papers to the envelope. "And will you though?" Mabel asked, her ancient eyes studying Linda with unnerving intensity. Linda looked around the kitchen at Sullivan's weathered face filled with poorly concealed hope, at Benjamin and Mabel Jackson, who had carried family knowledge of Hannah's work through generations at Harrington's professional assessment, and finally at Jake and Lily, who had appeared in the doorway drawn by the unusual number of visitors. "No," she decided firmly, surprising herself with the immediate certainty of her response. "This farm deserves to be preserved, not developed. Hannah's story deserves to be told, not buried under a golf course." Sullivan's expression brightened visibly while Benjamin nodded approval. Harrington, ever the pragmatist, began outlining next steps. "Cooper won't take rejection lightly," he warned. "We need to prepare for the hearing and accelerate the historical designation process. I'll file motions challenging Davis's ability to preside due to evident bias." As the adults continued strategizing, Linda noticed the twins watching with confused interest. This battle over history and preservation meant little to 8-year-olds whose primary concerns were more immediate. "Why don't you two show Mr. Jackson the limestone boundary stones you've been exploring?" she suggested, recognizing Benjamin's likely interest in these tangible connections to his ancestors' dangerous work. As Benjamin followed the children outside, his military straight posture softening in their company, Mabel remained seated at the kitchen table, her gnarled hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You're making the right choice," the elderly woman said quietly. "This land has always been more than just property. It stood for something important right from the beginning." "Did you know about the hidden chamber?" Linda asked, curious about how much family knowledge had survived through the generations. "Not its exact location," Mabel admitted, "but we knew Hannah had a secret printing press somewhere on the property. The stories were passed down mother to daughter, generation to generation. When Alfred died and the farm went to auction, we feared Hannah's legacy might be lost forever." "And now," Linda prompted, A smile transformed Mabel's weathered face momentarily, revealing the young woman she had once been. Now I believe Hannah would be pleased. Her work, hidden for so long, has found its way into the right hands. The land has chosen well. Outside, Benjamin was examining the limestone boundary stones with evident emotion, while the twins demonstrated how they had mapped the property perimeter. The connection between past and present, between Hannah's dangerous work and its rediscovery generations later, seemed to vibrate in the autumn air like a plucked string resonating across time. Whatever challenges lay ahead in the battle with Cooper, Linda knew with growing certainty that she stood on the right side of history, quite literally on ground that had once represented hope and freedom to those who had none. The following days unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Elizabeth Rodriguez arrived from Boston, a tall, elegant woman in her 50s, whose academic precision was balanced by evident passion for her ancestors' legacy. Her resemblance to the portrait of Hannah was striking, the same direct gaze, the same determined set of the jaw. All my professional life I've studied women's resistance movements, she explained as she examined the hidden chamber for the first time, her voice thick with emotion. And all along, my own ancestor was one of the most remarkable examples, publishing abolitionist materials from a secret press in Virginia at a time when such activities carried severe penalties. Elizabeth had brought family records that added valuable context to their discoveries, letters that obliquely referenced Hannah's activities, a family Bible with carefully recorded dates that corresponded to entries in the Freedom Ledger, and most significantly, an unfinished memoir begun by Hannah's nephew Ezra in 1899, the same year he had sealed the hidden chamber. Aunt Hannah instructed me to conceal her work until a time when it could be properly understood and valued, Ezra had written. She believed that eventually America would evolve beyond the prejudices that made her activities dangerous, and that someday her contribution to the cause of freedom would be recognized rather than condemned. Dr. Freeman and colleagues from 3 universities worked around the clock to document the historical significance of the discoveries, preparing comprehensive materials for the emergency historical designation application. Abigail Chen coordinated with conservation experts to assess preservation needs and develop recommendations for maintaining the artifacts in their original location. Harrington, meanwhile, built their legal defense against Cooper's challenge to Linda's purchase filing motions to dismiss the review for lack of specificity and demanding immediate access to all relevant records. He also submitted a formal ethics complaint regarding Commissioner Davis's evident partiality in the matter. Throughout these preparations, Linda maintained the twins' normal routine as much as possible, helping with homework, preparing meals, and trying to create a sense of stability amid the revolving door of experts and advocates now invested in the farm's preservation. Cooper's response to her rejection of his offer came swiftly and predictably. The county building inspector's report, delivered 3 days after his visit, cited numerous potential safety concerns, requiring immediate attention before any further renovation work could proceed. The estimated cost to address these suddenly discovered issues would stretch Linda's already strained budget to the breaking point. Textbook intimidation tactics, Harrington assessed after reviewing the report. Half of these violations aren't even covered by the county building code. They're manufacturing obstacles, hoping you'll decide the battle isn't worth fighting. 2 days before the scheduled hearing, Sullivan arrived at the farm with unexpected news. Cooper's planning something, he reported, accepting the coffee Linda offered. His company has started moving heavy equipment to a staging area visible from your eastern boundary. Purely for intimidation, there's no legitimate reason to position machinery there at this stage. Is there anything we can do to stop him? Linda asked, peering out the kitchen window, as if expecting to see bulldozers cresting the ridge. Not directly, Sullivan admitted. It's private property he already owns. But I've alerted Harrington, who's documenting everything for potential legal action if Cooper trespasses or creates nuisance conditions. The psychological warfare continued the following day when a surveying crew appeared at the edge of Linda's property, ostentatiously measuring and placing stakes along the boundary line. Though technically remaining on Cooper's adjacent land, their presence and occasional glances toward the farmhouse conveyed the intended message. Development was coming. Resistance was futile. That evening, with the hearing looming the next morning, Linda sat on the porch swing with Elizabeth Rodriguez, watching twilight settle over the autumn landscape. The historian had spent the day photographing and transcribing entries from Hannah's journals, her professional detachment occasionally giving way to profound emotional connection with her ancestors' words. In her later entries after the Civil War, Elizabeth shared, Hannah wrote about her hope that someday her work would be understood in its proper context. She seemed to have a remarkable faith that history would eventually render the right verdict on her activities, even if her contemporaries could not. Do you think she ever imagined her printing press and journals would be discovered more than 150 years later? Linda asked, watching the last light gild the limestone boundary stones. Elizabeth smiled, her academic precision momentarily yielding to a more personal reflection. I think she hoped for it. There's an entry from 1870 shortly before she instructed Ezra to seal the chamber. She wrote, I may not live to see justice fully prevail in this divided nation, but I trust that my words will find their way to those who will continue the work when the time is right. The profound connection across generations settled between them as darkness enveloped the farm. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation with Cooper and his allies on the county commission, a battle with uncertain outcome, despite their meticulous preparation. As if reading her thoughts, Elizabeth spoke again. Whatever happens tomorrow, Linda, you've already accomplished something remarkable. Hannah's story is documented now, her contribution to history secured. Even if Cooper ultimately prevails in developing this land, this historical record has been preserved. That's not enough, Linda replied with unexpected vehemence. Hannah's work deserves to be preserved where it happened in the context she created. This farm was a beacon of resistance and hope. It shouldn't become a footnote in a museum display while condos are built over the ground where people risked everything for freedom. Elizabeth studied her with newfound appreciation. You sound like her, she observed quietly. There's an entry from 1855 where Hannah writes about refusing an offer to relocate her activities to safer territory in Pennsylvania. She insisted that resistance had to happen where injustice lived, not just in places already aligned with freedom. The parallel hadn't occurred to Linda before, but now it resonated deeply. Like Hannah refusing the safer path, she was standing her ground against powerful opposition because she believed in the importance of this place, not just as her family's home, but as living history that deserved protection. Later that night, after checking on the sleeping twins, Linda stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the moonlit landscape. Cooper's machinery was visible on the distant ridge, metal behemoths, waiting to transform centuries of history into manicured leisure facilities. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, not just for her children's home and future, but for Hannah's legacy, for the documented and undocumented stories of those who had found refuge here on their journey to freedom, for the physical connection to a past that had shaped the present in ways both acknowledged and unrecognized. Tomorrow would determine whether the Oakwood farm remained a living testament to courage and conviction or became just another casualty in the relentless march of development. As Linda finally turned away from the window, her resolve hardened into certainty. Whatever it took, Hannah's legacy would not be bulldozed on her watch. The county hearing room buzzed with unusual activity for an early weekday morning. Local reporters sat in the back row, alerted by Cooper's press release about his major development announcement. County employees whispered among themselves, sensing the tension as Linda entered with Harrington Sullivan and Dr. Freeman. Nathan Cooper sat confidently at the respondents' table, flanked by two corporate attorneys in expensive suits. He nodded curtly to Linda, his expression suggesting the outcome was already determined. Beside him, Commissioner Davis arranged papers with studied officiousness, avoiding eye contact with anyone from Linda's group. Quite a turnout for a simple procedural review, Harrington muttered, noting the packed room. Cooper's making this a public spectacle to increase pressure. Elizabeth Rodriguez had remained at the farm with the twins, and Mabel continuing to document Hannah's journals while keeping the children distracted from the high-stakes legal proceedings. Benjamin Jackson, however, sat directly behind Linda, his military bearing a silent statement of support. Commissioner Davis called the hearing to order, his demeanor formal, but his eyes skittering away from Linda's direct gaze. We're here to address potential irregularities in the sheriff's sale of the former Oakwood property, he began. Our review has identified several procedural concerns that may invalidate the auction results. Harrington immediately rose. Before we proceed, we need to address a significant legal development. My client's property has been submitted for emergency consideration under the National Historic Preservation Act as a site of exceptional historical significance. That submission has no bearing on this proceeding, interjected Cooper's lead attorney, a razor-thin woman with calculating eyes. Pending applications don't create any legal impediment to the county's review authority. Commissioner Davis nodded in agreement. While Ms. Morris is certainly entitled to seek historical designation, it doesn't impact our determination regarding the auction's validity. Harrington remains standing. We also have evidence suggesting the alleged procedural errors were deliberately manufactured to benefit Mapleton Valley development. This accusation caused a stir in the room. Commissioner Davis rapped his gavel sharply. That's a serious allegation, counselor, and not relevant to today's proceeding. Please be seated. For the next 20 minutes, the county attorney methodically outlined the claimed procedural errors, technicalities about notification requirements, and publication deadlines. Each point seemed minor in isolation, but collectively created the impression of a flawed process. Given these irregularities, the county attorney concluded, we recommend the sale be invalidated and the property returned to sheriff's auction with proper adherence to all procedural requirements. Cooper's satisfied expression confirmed what everyone suspected: he had already arranged to be the successful bidder in any new auction. As Harrington rose to present their response, the hearing room doors opened. Dr. Marcus Freeman entered, accompanied by a distinguished man in a dark suit carrying an official-looking portfolio. Behind them came Benjamin Jackson and a small group of university professors, each carrying documentation folders. Apologies for the interruption, Dr. Freeman announced firmly. I'm Dr. Marcus Freeman from the State University, and this is Director James Marshall from the State Historic Preservation Office. Commissioner Davis frowned at the disruption. This hearing is already in progress. Commissioner Director Marshall interjected, approaching the bench. I need to inform you that as of 7:30 this morning, the Oakwood Farm has been granted emergency designation on the State Register of Historic Places with expedited consideration for the National Register. He placed official documents before the commissioner. Furthermore, the site has received preliminary designation in the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Program based on the exceptional artifacts and documentation discovered on the property. A murmur swept through the room as reporters began taking notes more vigorously. Cooper leaned forward, whispering urgently to his attorneys, while Commissioner Davis visibly paled. While I appreciate this information, Davis said stiffly, it doesn't directly impact the procedural review of the property sale. With respect, Commissioner, it absolutely does, Director Marshall replied firmly. State law explicitly prohibits any action that would jeopardize a designated historic site, including questioning established ownership without substantial cause. Dr. Freeman stepped forward. The materials discovered at the Oakwood Farm represent one of the most significant findings in recent historical scholarship on abolitionist activities in border states. We have documented evidence of an operational underground railroad station and the previously unidentified source of Freedom's Herald, a major abolitionist publication from 1850 to 1863. The room erupted in whispers as the assembled professors distributed information packets to the commissioners and reporters. Cooper's expression had transformed from confidence to calculation as he assessed this unexpected development. Perhaps we should recess briefly to review these new documents, Commissioner Davis suggested, clearly flustered by the shifting dynamic. If I may, Paul, Harrington interjected smoothly, we have additional evidence directly relevant to the procedural concerns raised today. He distributed folders to the commissioners. These records obtained from the state archives conclusively show that the auction notice for the Oakwood property was indeed published in all required outlets on the legally mandated schedule. How did you obtain these? The county attorney demanded. Our records show that's precisely our concern, Harrington interrupted. The county records relating to this property were mysteriously unavailable immediately after my client raised questions about Mr. Cooper's interest in the property. These archive copies demonstrate that the claimed procedural errors simply don't exist. As the commissioners reviewed the documents, Cooper rose abruptly. This is becoming a circus rather than a proper hearing, he declared with barely controlled anger. I move that we postpone until all these tangential matters can be sorted out. What Mr. Cooper means, Harrington replied coolly, is that he'd prefer to delay until he can find another avenue to seize control of historically significant property for commercial development. Before Cooper could respond, Benjamin Jackson spoke from his seat. There's something else the commissioners should know. My family has filed a formal ethics complaint with the State Attorney General's office regarding the manipulation of this property's auction process. He held up a folder of his own. We have documentation showing that the auction date was changed with minimal notice After my family expressed interest in purchasing our ancestral home, a change that coincidentally occurred immediately following a private meeting between Commissioner Davis and Mr. Cooper. The room erupted in whispers as Commissioner Davis visibly paled. These allegations are completely unfounded. Given the state designation and these new allegations, Director Marshall cut in, I strongly advise against any action invalidating Ms. Morris's purchase. Doing so could potentially violate multiple state preservation statutes and trigger a full investigation by our office and potentially the Attorney General. Cooper and his attorneys huddled in urgent consultation while the commissioners whispered among themselves. The momentum had shifted dramatically, and everyone in the room could feel it. After several tense minutes, Commission Chairwoman Wilson, who had been notably silent until now, spoke up. In light of these significant new developments, I move that we dismiss the procedural review and affirm the validity of the original sheriff's sale. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates that all required notifications were properly made. Despite Commissioner Davis's visible discomfort, the motion passed 4-1. Linda's purchase of the Oakwood farm would stand. As the hearing adjourned, Cooper approached Linda, his earlier confidence replaced by barely contained frustration. This isn't over, Ms. Morris, he said quietly, his voice carrying only to her and Sullivan, who had moved protectively to her side. Historical designation or not, that property remains crucial to our development plans. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer well above market value. The farm isn't for sale, Mr. Cooper, Linda replied firmly. Everyone has a price, Cooper insisted. Name yours. $1 million too. Think about what that would mean for your children's future. Linda considered his words, genuinely tempted by the financial security such an amount would provide. But then she thought of Hannah Oakwood's courage and the legacy she had protected at great personal risk. Some things aren't about price, Mr. Cooper, she said finally. They're about value, and those aren't the same thing. As Cooper stalked away, Elizabeth Rodriguez approached, having arrived during the proceedings. She extended her hand to Linda. Thank you for protecting my great-great-great-grandmother's legacy. When we lost the farm after Alfred's death, I thought Hannah's story might be lost forever. I feel like I was meant to find it, Linda admitted. But I'm not sure what happens next. Preserving everything properly will take resources I don't have. Director Marshall joined them. The state designation opens numerous funding opportunities for preservation and restoration. And given the exceptional nature of the discovery, several private foundations have already expressed interest in supporting the project. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Dr. Freeman and Elizabeth as they explained the historical significance of the Oakwood farm discovery. The story of Hannah Oakwood, educated woman, secret publisher, and Underground Railroad conductor, was emerging from the shadows of history, captivating public imagination. Linda stood slightly apart from the crowd watching as her private discovery became a public story. Sullivan joined her, his weathered face softened with something approaching tenderness. You did it, he said simply. You stood up to Cooper and protected something irreplaceable. We did it, Linda corrected him, acknowledging the coalition that had formed around the farm's preservation. I couldn't have done this alone. Sullivan's expression grew serious. Cooper meant what he said. This isn't over. He's invested too much in his development plans to abandon them easily. He'll look for another angle, another vulnerability. Linda nodded, understanding the reality of their situation. Today's victory was significant but not definitive. The battle to preserve the Oakwood farm would continue, requiring vigilance and determination in the face of whatever tactics Cooper might employ next. But as she watched Jake and Lily racing around the courthouse lawn, their faces alight with the simple joy of movement, Linda felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they were fighting for something that mattered, not just a home for her family, but a piece of American history that deserved to be preserved and shared. Does this mean we get to keep our house? Lily asked, hopefully breathless from running. Yes, sweetheart, Linda replied, hugging her children close. And it means we have an important job to do, helping people learn about Hannah and the brave work she did. As they walked toward the car, Linda glanced back at the courthouse where history and justice had aligned, at least for today. The pocket watch Jake had found sat in her purse, its weight a tangible connection to Hannah Oakwood across the span of generations. The land chooses its keepers, Mabel had said, and Linda was determined to prove worthy of having been chosen. That evening, as golden autumn light bathed the Oakwood farm, A small gathering assembled on the porch. Sullivan, Elizabeth Benjamin, and Mabel Jackson, Dr. Freeman, and Harrington. The day's victory had created a moment of shared purpose and relief, though everyone understood that Cooper's threat remained. "We've established a preliminary preservation plan," Dr. Freeman explained as they walked toward the root cellar. "The first phase involves creating proper climate control for the hidden chamber and professionally cataloging all artifacts." "What about the house itself?" Linda asked, ever practical. "I still have to make it livable for my family." "That's where the historical designation helps," Director Marshall explained. "There are specific grants for homeowners of historic properties that would cover much of your renovation costs, provided the work preserves the historical character." As the experts discussed technical details, Elizabeth took Linda aside. "When I was growing up, my grandmother used to tell me stories about Hannah, how she was brilliant but had to hide her true work, how she risked everything to fight against injustice. I became a historian largely because of those stories, but I never imagined finding actual proof of her activities." "It must be overwhelming to suddenly have your family history confirmed and made public," Linda observed. Elizabeth nodded. "It is, but it's also incredibly validating. Hannah's voice, which was silenced for so long, can finally be heard." As dusk fell, the visitors departed, leaving Linda alone with her children in the suddenly quiet farmhouse. She stood on the porch watching the sunset paint the old limestone fence posts with golden light, the same light that had fallen on those posts when they guided frightened travelers to safety, when Hannah had risked everything to print words of freedom in her hidden press. Linda's phone chimed in with a text from Harrington. "Cooper just withdrew all permit applications for the Ridge development. Local paper wants to interview you tomorrow." The immediate threat had passed, but Linda knew that preserving Hannah's legacy would be a lifelong commitment. The farmhouse that had begun as an impulsive purchase, a place to raise her children, had become something far more significant. A living historical site, a testament to one woman's courage and a responsibility that would shape Linda's life in ways she was only beginning to understand. That evening, as she tucked her children into bed, Jake asked a question that caught her off guard. "Mom, do you think Hannah would be happy we found her secret room?" Linda paused, considering. "I think she would be. She preserved everything so carefully, hoping someone would discover it when the time was right. I think she'd be proud that her story can finally be told," Lily added sleepily. "And we get to be part of her story now, right?" Jake persisted. "Yes, we do," Linda replied softly. "We're a new chapter in a very old story." Later that night, Linda sat alone in the kitchen, reading through copies of Hannah's journals by lamplight. The words written more than 150 years earlier resonated with passionate intelligence and unwavering moral conviction. One passage in particular caught her attention. "I write not knowing if these words will ever find their intended audience. I imprint truths that many wish to silence, but I persist in the faith that someday the world will be ready to hear what must be said, and someone will find what I have hidden and understand its worth." Linda closed the journal, overwhelmed by the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this place at this moment in history. She had come looking for a home for her children and found instead a mission, becoming the custodian of a legacy that had waited generations to be revealed. Through the window, she could see the ancient limestone posts marking the boundaries of the property, standing firm against the darkness. They had withstood nearly 2 centuries of weather and changed their purpose, hidden in plain sight all along. Now they would stand as silent witnesses to a new chapter in the farm's long history, one where secrets became stories and a forgotten voice finally found its audience. What Linda Morris couldn't know as she prepared for bed in the house that had chosen her as surely as she had chosen it was how profoundly the discovery in the root cellar would transform not just her life and her children's futures, but the historical understanding of resistance and courage in a dark chapter of American history. The confrontation with Cooper had been won, but the true work of honoring Hannah Oakwood's legacy was just beginning. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, the Oakwood farm had undergone a remarkable transformation. The weathered farmhouse now stood proudly with a fresh coat of historically accurate white paint, its wraparound porch meticulously restored to 19th century specifications. The sagging roof had been replaced, the stone chimney repointed, and the original windows carefully refurbished, rather than replaced, all funded through historic preservation grants. But the most significant changes weren't visible from the outside. The root cellar's hidden chamber had been professionally preserved, its precious contents cataloged and protected, while remaining in their original location. A climate control system had been discreetly installed, ensuring the delicate papers and printing materials would survive for generations to come. Linda stood on the porch watching as a small tour group followed Elizabeth Rodriguez toward the newly constructed visitor center, a tasteful building designed to complement the historic farmhouse while providing space for exhibits and educational programs. The sound of hammering came from the old barn where restoration specialists were completing the final phase of structural repairs. "It still feels surreal sometimes," Linda said to Robert Sullivan, who had joined her for the day's first tour. "6 months ago, I was just trying to create a home for my kids. Now we're running a historical site." Sullivan smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling with genuine warmth. "And doing an extraordinary job of it. The Oakwood Farm project is already being cited as a model for how to preserve historical sites while keeping them as living, functioning spaces." The designation of the Oakwood Farm as a site on the National Register of Historic Places had opened doors that Linda never could have imagined. The initial emergency grants for preservation had been followed by substantial funding from historical societies, educational foundations, and private donors captivated by Hannah's story. Elizabeth Rodriguez had leveraged her academic connections to secure a major grant from her university specifically for creating educational programming around women's roles in the abolitionist movement. Most significantly, the Oakwood Heritage Foundation had been established with Linda, Elizabeth, and Sullivan as founding board members. The foundation now owned the land and buildings with a permanent conservation easement, ensuring they could never be developed, while a special provision granted Linda lifetime residency rights in the farmhouse itself. "Mom, the school bus is here," Jake called, racing around the corner of the house. At 9, he had embraced his role as the youngest unofficial tour guide, proudly showing visiting children the secret doorway that had changed their lives. Linda watched as a yellow school bus rolled up the newly restored gravel driveway. Today's visitors were fifth graders from an elementary school 30 miles away, part of the educational outreach program that brought students to learn about the Underground Railroad and the power of the written word in the fight against slavery. "Ready for another group?" Sullivan asked, his eyes twinkling with the enthusiasm he brought to every tour. "Always," Linda replied. As a former librarian, she had found unexpected fulfillment in sharing Hannah's story with young people. She had reduced her hours at the county library to part-time, allowing her to devote 3 days a week to the growing educational programs at what was now officially known as the Hannah Oakwood House and Underground Railroad Museum. As the children filed off the bus, Linda greeted their teacher, a young woman who had specifically requested this field trip after reading about the discovery in a national education journal. "We've been studying the Underground Railroad all month," the teacher explained enthusiastically. "The children have so many questions about how Hannah kept her work secret while publishing Freedom's Herald." Linda led the group toward the visitor center, where Elizabeth was waiting to begin their tour. The center's main room featured carefully designed exhibits explaining Hannah's work, including facsimiles of Freedom's Herald issues, maps of known Underground Railroad routes, and interactive displays designed to help young visitors understand the risks and moral courage involved. "Before we go into the historic house and see the secret room," Linda began addressing the wide-eyed students, "I want you to think about something important. Hannah Oakwood had to hide her work because in her time helping enslaved people escape to freedom was against the law. Sometimes being brave means doing what's right even when it's against the rules." A small hand shot up immediately. "Did she ever get caught?" "That's a great question," Linda replied. According to her journal, she had several close calls. Once a slave catcher actually searched her house while she had a family hiding in a space beneath the kitchen floor. Another time, authorities suspected her of writing Freedom's Herald and searched for the printing press, but they never found the hidden room. As the tour progressed to the farmhouse, Linda noticed a familiar black SUV pulling into the parking area. Nathan Cooper emerged alone and without his usual corporate confidence. Since the courthouse confrontation, Cooper had maintained a low profile locally. His company's development plans significantly scaled back after the public relations disaster of attempting to demolish what had turned out to be a significant historical site. Linda excused herself while Elizabeth continued the tour, walking over to meet Cooper in the parking area. "Mr. Cooper," she greeted him neutrally, "this is unexpected." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Morris, or should I say Director Morris now?" Just Linda is fine. What brings you here? Cooper gazed past her at the restored farmhouse and the children filing inside. Curiosity, I suppose. I've been hearing about the transformation. The local business council can't stop talking about the tourism boost the museum is providing. Linda waited, sensing there was more to his visit. My company has taken some significant hits since our disagreement, he continued. The ethics investigation into Commissioner Davis has affected several of our projects throughout the county. I'm sorry to hear that, Linda replied diplomatically, though they both knew she wasn't. In any case, Cooper said, reaching into his jacket, I came to deliver this personally. He handed her an envelope bearing the Cooper Development Group letterhead. My board of directors has authorized a substantial donation to your foundation. Consider it a gesture of community goodwill. Linda opened the envelope to find a check for $250,000 made out to the Oakwood Heritage Foundation. That's unexpected, she managed, studying his face for any hidden agenda. Business adaptation, he replied with a hint of his old confidence. We've revised our development approach to emphasize historical preservation and cultural tourism. The success of your project has demonstrated there's profit in preservation when done correctly. Linda suspected the gesture of goodwill had more to do with rehabilitating his company's tarnished image than genuine conversion to preservation values, but the foundation could certainly use the funds to expand their educational programs. The foundation appreciates your support, she said carefully. I assume this comes without strings attached. Completely unrestricted, Cooper confirmed. Though we wouldn't object to appropriate recognition in your donor materials. We can certainly arrange that. As Cooper turned to leave, Linda added, would you like a tour since you're here? The children would be fascinated to hear about how the property was almost developed instead of preserved. And Cooper actually smiled at that. Perhaps another time. Today is clearly devoted to education rather than cautionary tales about development overreach. After he departed, Linda rejoined the school group now gathered in front of the entrance to the hidden chamber as Elizabeth dramatically demonstrated how to open the concealed door. The children gasped with genuine wonder. This is where Hannah would work late at night, Elizabeth explained, leading them into the small room where the printing press stood. She would write and print Freedom's Herald while everyone else in the house was asleep. Then her trusted friends would distribute the publications to other abolitionists throughout the region. A small girl raised her hand. Wasn't she scared? Her journals tell us she was often frightened, Elizabeth acknowledged, but she wrote that her fear of doing nothing was greater than her fear of being caught. She believed that words could change minds, and changing minds was the first step to changing laws. After the tour concluded and the children departed, Linda sat with Elizabeth and Sullivan in what had once been the farmhouse's formal parlor and now served as the foundation's informal meeting room. Cooper made a donation, Linda announced, showing them the check. A rather substantial one. Well, that's unexpected, Sullivan remarked, examining the check with raised eyebrows. He mentioned something about his company pivoting toward historical preservation and cultural tourism, Linda explained. I suspect it's more about improving their public image after the ethics investigation made the national news. Whatever his motivation, the funds will help expand the educational program, Elizabeth noted pragmatically. We've had to turn away several school groups because we couldn't accommodate them. As they discussed plans for the donation, Linda gazed out the window at the limestone fence posts that had once guided frightened travelers to safety. Her life had taken a turn she never could have imagined when she impulsively bid on the rundown farmhouse at the sheriff's sale, but there was no denying the sense of purpose she now felt. That evening, after the last visitors had departed and the children were doing homework in the private family rooms upstairs, Linda made her way to the hidden chamber alone. Though she now entered it almost daily as part of the educational tours she occasionally visited in these quiet moments, trying to connect with the woman who had worked so courageously in secret. She sat at Hannah's desk, gently touching the worn wood where the abolitionist had written her passionate arguments for freedom. On the wall hung a portrait of Hannah, a reproduction created from the tiny pocket watch photograph that Jake had found, now professionally enhanced and enlarged. I wonder what you'd think of all this, Linda murmured to the portrait. Your secret room now welcomes dozens of visitors each day. Your words, which you had to hide, are now proudly displayed for everyone to read. The transformation of the farm had been remarkable, but the transformation in Linda's own life was perhaps even more profound. From a struggling single mother seeking an affordable home to the director of a nationally recognized historical site, She had found an unexpected calling as the steward of Hannah's legacy. A knock on the open door interrupted her thoughts. Elizabeth stood in the doorway, a leather-bound volume in her hands. "I thought I might find you here," she said, entering the room. "I wanted to show you something we discovered while translating some of Hannah's coded journal entries." She opened the volume to a marked page. This passage is from 1862, when she feared authorities were closing in on her activities. Linda read the carefully translated text. "I work in darkness now, uncertain if these words will ever reach their intended audience. Yet I continue in the faith that someday, when justice has finally prevailed, someone will discover this chamber and understand why I risked everything for freedom's cause. Perhaps then, when my voice can no longer be silenced when those who fear the truth, these pages will speak for me." Linda looked up, deeply moved by the words written more than 150 years earlier. "She was writing for us," she said quietly. "She knew someday someone would find this place." Elizabeth nodded. She created this hidden room not just to conceal her work, but to preserve it for future generations. She was deliberately creating a time capsule in the hope that someday the world would be ready to hear her voice. 2 years to the day after Linda Morris had first discovered the hidden chamber, she stood at a podium erected on the farmhouse lawn, addressing a crowd that filled the once overgrown fields. Historians, educators, journalists, and visitors from across the country had gathered for the official dedication of the Hannah Oakwood Center for Freedom Studies, a new research facility constructed on the property with funding from the National Endowment for the Humanities. "When I bought this farm at a sheriff's sale, I was just looking for a home for my family." Linda began, her voice carrying across the attentive audience. "I could never have imagined that removing old wallpaper and cleaning out a root cellar would lead us here to a discovery that would rewrite history and create a legacy that will endure for generations." Behind her, the farmhouse stood fully restored, its white clapboard gleaming in the spring sunshine. Adjacent to it, the new research center, designed to complement the historic architecture while providing state-of-the-art facilities for scholars, was marked by a bronze plaque bearing Hannah Oakwood's words, "Let truth be told that freedom may follow." In the front row sat Jake and Lily, now 10 years old, beside Elizabeth Rodriguez and Mabel Jackson in her wheelchair. The elderly woman, now 80, had lived to see her family's legacy fully recognized and celebrated. Beside them sat Dr. Freeman and Sullivan, whose prompt recognition of the discovery's significance had been crucial in those first critical days. "The Hannah Oakwood House has welcomed more than 50,000 visitors in the past 2 years," Linda continued. "School children, historians, and people from all walks of life have come to learn about one woman's extraordinary courage and her commitment to justice in a time of profound moral crisis." What Linda didn't mention was how thoroughly the discovery had transformed her own life. The former librarian was now the executive director of the Oakwood Heritage Foundation, overseeing a staff of 8 and an annual budget that had grown to over $1.2 million. She had completed a master's degree in historical preservation through an online program, finding unexpected fulfillment in her second career as the steward of Hannah's legacy. Today, we dedicate this research center not only to Hannah Oakwood, but to all those whose voices were silenced by history, the countless individuals who risked everything for freedom and justice, whose names may never be known, but whose courage changed the world. As Linda concluded her remarks and the ribbon-cutting ceremony began, she caught sight of a familiar figure standing at the back of the crowd. Nathan Cooper. Their paths had crossed occasionally in the 2 years since the courthouse confrontation, their relationship evolving from antagonism to a wary mutual respect. Cooper's company had indeed pivoted toward historic preservation, currently renovating several 19th century buildings in downtown Riverbend into a boutique hotel that emphasized the region's history. The discovery at the Oakwood farm had rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. The successful preservation of the site had inspired a renewed interest in local history throughout the region. 3 other Underground Railroad sites had subsequently been identified and preserved. The County Historical Society, once operating on a shoestring budget with aging volunteers, now had paid staff in regular school programs. After the ceremony concluded and guests began touring the new research facility, a young woman approached Linda. She introduced herself as Jasmine Williams, a doctoral student in history. "Ms. Morris, I wanted to thank you personally," she said earnestly. "My dissertation focuses on female abolitionists, and the Hannah Oakwood papers have completely transformed my research." She documented networks and methods that we previously only speculated about. I'm just the person who found the hidden door, Linda replied modestly. Hannah did the hard part. But you recognize the importance of what you found, Jasmine insisted, and you fought to preserve it when it would have been easier to take the developer's money and walk away. The young historian's words reminded Linda of those tense days when Cooper had offered her millions for the property, a temptation that had been genuine and powerful with two children to raise alone and limited financial resources. Yet something about Hannah's courage had made it impossible to surrender her legacy for personal gain. Later that afternoon, as the crowd thinned and staff began cleaning up, Sullivan found Linda sitting on the porch swing, taking a moment of quiet reflection. Quite a journey from that first day when we examined the hidden chamber, Sullivan observed, joining her on the swing. Sometimes I still can't believe it all happened, Linda admitted. Finding the chamber, the court battle, the preservation process. It feels like another lifetime. You know, Sullivan said thoughtfully, I've been studying Hannah's journals for 2 years now, and something struck me recently. Hannah wrote often about believing her work would be discovered when the time was right and by the person meant to find it. She couldn't have known who would find it, Linda pointed out. No, but she believed in purpose, that nothing happens purely by chance, Sullivan replied. Think about it, of all the people who might have purchased this farm, it was bought by a librarian with knowledge of historical documents and preservation, someone who immediately recognized the significance of what she found. Linda had never considered this perspective. You think it was somehow meant to be? I think Hannah would have thought so. Sullivan smiled. In her last journal entry, she wrote something that's always stayed with me. I may not live to see justice prevail, but I trust that my words will find their way to those who will continue the work when the time is right. The thought was both humbling and profound, the idea that across more than a century, Hannah had somehow entrusted her legacy to the future to Linda, who had indeed continued the work by ensuring her voice would finally be heard. 5 years had passed since Linda Morris first discovered the hidden chamber beneath her farmhouse. What had begun as a local historical curiosity had evolved into a nationally recognized center for Underground Railroad research and education. On this bright autumn morning, Linda stood beside the governor as he cut the ribbon on the newest addition to the Oakwood Complex, a state-of-the-art educational pavilion designed to accommodate the ever-increasing number of school groups visiting the site. This pavilion represents our state's commitment to preserving the complete history of our region, the governor announced to the assembled crowd. The Hannah Oakwood House has become a model for how historical sites can engage with their communities and provide meaningful educational experiences for visitors of all ages. As applause rippled through the audience, Linda glanced at her children standing in the front row. Jake and Lily, now 13, had grown up alongside the expanding historical site. What had once been an impulsive purchase at a sheriff's sale had become the defining element of their childhood and had shaped their interests and ambitions in unexpected ways. After the ceremony concluded, Linda led a private tour for the governor and key donors through the original farmhouse. The home's main floor remained meticulously preserved as a museum space, while the family continued to live in the private upstairs quarters. The dual purpose of the building had created logistical challenges over the years, but had ultimately enhanced the site's authenticity as a living history location. The printing press remains exactly where we found it, Linda explained as they entered the hidden chamber, now accessible through a carefully designed entryway that protected the artifacts while making them viewable to visitors. Our conservators determined that moving it would risk damage to both the press and the historical context. The hidden room that had once been filled with dust and silence now buzzed with carefully controlled lighting and humidity systems, preserving the fragile papers and equipment for future generations. Glass cases displayed selected issues of Freedom's Herald, while interactive screens allowed visitors to explore digitized versions of Hannah's journals and publications. It's remarkable to think this remained hidden for over a century, the governor commented, examining the printing press. How many other historical treasures might still be waiting to be discovered in old buildings across our state? That's actually become something of a movement, Linda replied. Since our discovery was publicized, similar hidden spaces have been found in at least 12 other historic homes in the region. Nothing quite as significant as Hannah's printing press, but each one adds to our understanding of the past. Indeed, the Oakwood effect, as historians had dubbed it, had inspired property owners across the country to examine their historic homes more carefully. Several minor but interesting discoveries had made national news, including a collection of Civil War letters found behind a wall in Georgia and a cache of Prohibition-era bottles in a hidden basement compartment in Chicago. As the VIP guests departed, Linda found herself momentarily alone in the visitor center. The modern building, constructed 3 years after the initial discovery, now welcomed over 75,000 visitors annually. Interactive exhibits explain the Underground Railroad network, the risks faced by those who assisted escaped slaves, and the particular dangers Hannah had confronted as a female publisher of abolitionist materials. A wall of photographs documented the site's transformation from neglected farmhouse to national landmark. Linda paused before an image of herself and the twins standing on the porch the day after the courthouse confrontation, exhausted but triumphant, having successfully defended their right to preserve Hannah's legacy rather than surrender it to development. Quite a journey, isn't it? Elizabeth Rodriguez appeared beside her now, a permanent fixture at the site as the foundation's research director. Her academic career had shifted from Boston University to the local state college, where she had established a program in women's history focusing on activism and resistance. "Sometimes I still can't believe it all happened," Linda admitted. "Remember when we thought success would be just preserving the printing press and maybe getting a historical marker?" Elizabeth laughed. "And now we have a research center, educational pavilion, visitor center, publication series, and a waiting list of scholars applying for fellowships." The Oakwood Heritage Foundation now employed 23 full-time staff, including historians, educators, preservation specialists, and administrators. Its annual budget had grown to $3.8 million, funded through a combination of endowment income grants, admission fees, and donations. The site had been featured in documentaries on PBS and the History Channel, and Finding Hannah, the book Linda and Elizabeth had co-authored about the discovery, had become required reading in many college history courses. Through the window, Linda watched as 3 buses unloaded middle school students from a neighboring county. Lily, now tall and confident, stepped forward to greet the first group, wearing the blue polo shirt that identified the site's educational staff. "Welcome to the Hannah Oakwood House," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the lawn. "My name is Lily, and I have a unique perspective on this historic site because I was there when we discovered the hidden chamber 5 years ago." Linda felt a surge of pride watching her daughter engage so naturally with the visitors. Growing up alongside a developing historical site had shaped both twins in profound ways. While Lily had embraced Hannah's legacy and already announced her intention to study history and museum management, in college, Jake had developed a passionate interest in historic preservation, his bedroom wall featuring architectural drawings of the various buildings on the property. That evening, as the sun set over the limestone fence posts that had once guided frightened travelers to safety, Linda stood on the porch reflecting on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this moment. The simple dream of providing a stable home for her children had evolved into something far more significant, a mission to preserve and share a courageous woman's contribution to justice and freedom. Sullivan joined her, his presence a comfortable constant in the years since their first meeting. Their relationship had deepened from professional collaboration to personal connection, his steady support and shared commitment to Hannah's legacy, creating bonds that transcended their initial roles as homeowner and historian. "I was thinking about when we first moved in," Linda said, watching the last light gild the ancient stones. "Remember how disappointed the twins were that the house didn't have air conditioning or updated bathrooms?" Sullivan laughed. "And now they give tours explaining why preserving the original architecture is so important." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't found the hidden room?" Linda asked. Sullivan considered the question thoughtfully. "I suspect Hannah would have found another way to make her voice heard. The truth has a way of emerging eventually, but I'm grateful it happened through you, someone who understood the value of what she'd discovered and had the courage to protect it." As darkness enveloped the farm, the landscape lighting illuminated the property's features: the restored farmhouse, the research center, the educational pavilion, and the visitor center. Each element worked together to preserve and share Hannah's legacy, creating a living monument to courage and conviction that continued to inspire new generations. The circle had indeed come full. What Hannah had hidden in secrecy and fear was now celebrated openly. What Linda had purchased as simply an affordable home had become a nationally significant historic site. And most importantly, the courage that had driven Hannah to risk everything for justice continued to inspire new generations through the preserved record of her work. The Oakwood farm had been transformed, but perhaps the most meaningful transformation had been in those who had discovered and preserved its legacy, ordinary people who had recognized the extraordinary value in what others had overlooked, and in doing so had become part of a continuing story of courage that spans centuries.